I think we're back, Pat.
Yeah, I was waiting for the music. Anyway, welcome back to Everything All the Time. I'm Pat O'Brien along with Court McCowan. And we have Denny Somack, who's a
Excited
rock and
for
roll
this.
archivist. And is probably, I've known Denny for how many years, Denny?
almost 15 years, I think.
Yeah.
Wow.
Welcome to the show. Well, we're going to play the opening to Stairway, which is one of the most
Thank you.
iconic openings. Denny's written this book, Get the Lead Out, How Led Zeppelin Became the Biggest Band in the World. And Denny is a music archivist. In other words, he keeps track of the Beatles and Led Zeppelin. He's written books about the Beatles, iconic books about the Beatles, and he's written a book about Led Zeppelin, and he knows everything about them.
My favorite band all time, number one.
What? How did Led Zeppelin become the biggest band in the world?
By persistence, playing live, having a notorious manager, and not taking crap from anybody.
Well, that was,
Basically,
that's what the Beatles kind of did. I remember Mick Jagger used to say to John, John, you're missing the point. You got to play live. And Lennon would say, no, you're missing the point, Michael.
But the other thing that was interesting is that Peter Grant, their notorious manager, he hired a publicist to keep the press away.
Yeah, that's
He
never
wouldn't allow the band to do any press.
That's never a good idea. And they're cool guys. I know those guys. I mean,
but it worked. It kept the mystique going. Bill Harry, who was their PR person, had previously been the Beatles' PR person. He was from Liverpool. And he couldn't believe it. He got the job. He said, I'd never heard of this. Peter Grant decided he wanted a PR person to keep the press away.
What did you think of the lawsuit from Spirit? Now, Spirit wrote this song, or did this song called Taurus, which the opening of Taurus sounds pretty much exactly like the opening to Stairway to Heaven, with my ear. And I think it's the same thing, but what do you think?
To a lot of people's ear. And I think had the jury heard the two songs next to each other, like you've played, it might have gone the other direction. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the jury was not allowed to hear it. They could only look at the sheet music.
They couldn't hear the other song?
Oh, really?
No, they weren't allowed to compare the two because they claimed, smart lawyer, claimed that the copyright had been filed physically, not recorded.
Well, that's very interesting.
What kind of a trial is that when you can't present that
Well,
evidence? And I'm on Led Zeppelin's side. I mean,
hey, if the glove doesn't fit.
Exactly. I used to say to George Harrison, "You mean when you sing My Sweet Lord, you don't hear I Feel Fine? I'm so fine."
That case, they
She's
allowed
she's so
these two
fine.
songs
I'm
to be
sorry.
played.
Yeah.
In this case, though, they said no. You can only use the sheet music because that's what was filed in the Copyright Office.
Is Denny Somack is our guest? He's the probably the number one archivist of music we love. All that music's coming back, isn't it? We're Court and I were talking.
It never really went away, Pat.
It never went away, but
no.
Yeah.
You have Is your son still have his band?
Yeah. And he produced the last Bob Dylan album, tribute to Bob Dylan.
Okay. All right. So, I that music never goes away. I mean, I took my son, he's 28 now, but when he was 13, I took him to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I said, now watch this. You're never going to see a better keyboard player in the world than this guy.
And there isn't. Except the Zombies guy is pretty good.
I mean, it blows me away. But yeah, I mean, like I said, Zeppelin's my favorite band. But it's one of these bands that even today, and a lot like the Beatles, the music holds up. There's no lapsing in it. I mean, you can't play a Tears for Fears song today and go, wow.
I disagree. Tears for Fears.
That's a
bad example.
Well, okay. Tears for Fears.
We're the Boomtown Rats when we need them.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
But I mean, some of these bands, they come and they go, or whatever it is. But Led Zeppelin, I mean, they're pretty much their catalog. You can still play any song off any album today, and it rings true. It's a great song. It's unbelievable. What a great, I think the greatest rock and roll band of all time.
And, someone's at your door. Denny Somack is our guest. He's a rock and roll historian. What are the guys? I think they wrote that song in a day or two.
Yeah, well, I think Jimmy had the music ready to go, and then he played it for Robert. And what most people you may not know this, but on the BBC live recordings that Zeppelin put out,
Right.
they play Stairway to Heaven for the first time. And what's amazing is if you listen to that and you hear the audience applause, it's like there's almost no applause because nobody had ever heard it before.
They're
Wow.
like, yeah. I mean, and that's why we'll get to the Beatles in the next segment. But that's why the Beatles wrote their own music because they were playing Little Richard and
Right,
Elvis
right.
or whatever was out. And finally, Lennon said to Paul, "We should write our own songs because
Right.
they're always last on the bill in Liverpool." And they wrote
Yep.
"Love Me Do," and that's the beginning of that.
Let me ask you this, Denny. Why do you think Led Zeppelin never came back after Bonham's
John
death?
Bonham,
Yeah,
yeah.
after John Bonham died, because I mean I know there was a time obviously where there was a lapse in that, but I just watched on Access TV the other night the
Right,
O2
right.
concert with Jason Bonham.
Yep.
Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. There were talks at the time of a tour. There were talks of them actually touring. And
Yep.
whatever happened with that?
Well, what they felt was that because it wasn't the original band, and as you know, the power of Zeppelin is derived from the drums. Without that, everything else was hung on the power of the drums, and they
Right.
just didn't feel that they were going to get anybody. The only person that possibly could have filled in would have been Carmine Appice, because he was John Bonham's idol.
Right.
And there was another great drummer that had a big influence on Bonham. And Pat, you may remember this guy. You remember Lee Michaels? He had a drummer named Frosty.
Lee Michaels and Frosty.
One hit called "Do You Know What I Mean?"
Do you know what I mean? I say that to
know what I
Cord
mean?
all the time. What's
And I
wrong
don't
with
know.
Jason Bonham, John's son?
Yeah,
No,
Jason, phenomenal.
No, there's no question. He's a great drummer. But when I was talking to Chris Squire from Yes, who actually they were the opening act for Zeppelin at the O2. It was
Can you
Chris
imagine?
Squire, Alan
Wow.
White. They did that little fanfare. But Chris had the unique perspective of saying, I saw them in '88 at the Atlantic Records 40th anniversary. And it wasn't that great, but basically Jason was only 19.
Right.
Now, he's a great drummer today.
Yes.
Did you see the
So-
Heart? Did you see the Heart cover
Yes.
when Heart covered "Stairway to Heaven" at the
Kennedy Center.
Kennedy Center
Yeah, the
Awards?
Kennedy Center, right,
And when they
right.
came on, I thought, you can't cover "Stairway to Heaven," but man, they nailed it.
They nailed it.
That was good.
They're one of the few bands. If you really look at their repertoire, Barracuda could have been written by Led Zeppelin.
That's a great example. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think if you go through the catalog of Led Zeppelin, you go through they were just four guys. It was
Yep.
just four guys. It was a guitar, a bass, and a drum, and a phenomenal vocalist. I saw him in '77, and it was the greatest to this day, the greatest concert I've ever seen in my life.
You
Right.
didn't see the Beatles?
I did not see the Beatles.
I just bought my son all the remastered Led Zeppelins, and those things are great to have because first of all, to hear them on vinyl, which
Yeah.
is great. Do you prefer vinyl, Denny?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was up in New York, and somebody from Atlantic sent me the entire catalog on vinyl. So, yeah.
Oh, send it on. We'll
So,
take it.
yeah.
We'll help you.
We'll
listen.
take a listen and send it back.
Yeah. Okay. No, I still have most of my vinyl records. I have about 12,000 of them.
How did before we take a break here for a minute? How did Zeppelin become the biggest band in the world?
Just they did stuff that nobody had done before. They took songs, simple blues songs. And the real hidden secret, though, was their records, because Jimmy Page was the producer of all those records, and very, very under the radar, so to speak, back then. But he's the reason. His production techniques were amazing. That's what made those records sound so good.
Whatever happened to their idea of starting a supergroup with Jeff Beck and all that?
Well, that was supposed to be, and then Keith Moon and John Entwistle were going to be in the band, along with Beck and Page, and they had quit The Who, and that lasted about 2 weeks,
Right.
and they rejoined The Who, and that was the end of that.
Right. Well, I've seen 3 Who farewell concerts.
I went to the first one in 1982. That was phenomenal. That was and that
I've
was
been to 3 of them.
I've been to 3. Yeah. But there's.
And
But
I said
that's-
to the guys backstage, "This is my 3rd farewell."
Right.
And I said, "Well, this is going to be a 4th," and then they go, "And a 5th,
and a fifth,
6th,
and a fifth, and a sixth.
Right.
Denny Somack is our guest. Denny, can you hold on for a second?
Sure.
We'll be back in a minute
Thanks.
with Denny Somack, and we're going to talk Beatles when we come back.